Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. The next morning was a flurry of activity as we all got ready for school. Mom insisted on taking about 1,000,000 photos of us, her eyes suspiciously bright as she fussed over Maddie's outfit and hair. As we stood at the bus stop, I could feel the nervous energy radiating off Maddie. She kept fidgeting with her backpack strap, her eyes darting around nervously. "Remember," I said quietly. "Head high, shoulders back. You've got this." She nodded, squaring her shoulders just as the bus rounded the corner. As it pulled up in front of us, Maddie took a deep breath and stepped forward. To my relief, there were no immediate negative reactions as we boarded the bus. A few curious glances, sure, but nothing overtly hostile. We found seats near the back, and I kept a protective eye on Maddie as more students got on at subsequent stops. The real test came when we arrived at school. As we walked through the main entrance, I could feel the stairs and hear the whispers start up. Maddie's steps faltered for a moment, but she pressed on, her chin held high. We had just reached Maddie's locker when a familiar voice called out, "Hey, Michael, looking good, man!" I winced, turning to see Tyler, one of Michael's old friends, approaching with a grin. Maddie tensed beside me, her face a mix of fear and determination. "Actually," she said, her voice soft but steady, "it's Maddie now. I'm transgender." Tyler's steps faltered, his eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, I feared the worst. But then, to my immense relief, his face broke into a genuine smile. "Oh, wow! That's awesome, Maddie. It suits you." The tension in Maddie's shoulders eased slightly, a tentative smile spreading across her face. "Really? You're okay with it?" Tyler shrugged, still smiling. "Why wouldn't I be? You're still you, right? Just more you, I guess." I could have hugged Tyler in that moment. His easy acceptance seemed to break the tension in the air. Other students who had been watching the interaction warily began to disperse, the whispers dying down. As the first bell rang, signaling the start of classes, I gave Maddie's hand a quick squeeze. "You've got this," I whispered. "I'll see you at lunch, okay?" She nodded, her smile growing more confident. "Okay, thanks, Arwen." I watched her walk away, her head held high, and felt a surge of pride. My little sister was one of the bravest people I knew. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of adjustments and new experiences. Maddie faced her share of challenges, confused teachers, insensitive comments from some students, the awkwardness of gym class and bathroom situations. But for every difficulty, there seemed to be a triumph. She found unexpected allies among her classmates. The school's GSA, Gender and Sexuality Alliance, welcomed her with open arms, providing a safe space and valuable resources. Even some of the teachers went out of their way to support her, with her English teacher, Mrs. Harrison, being particularly vocal in shutting down any bullying attempts. At home, the changes were just as significant. Mom threw herself into learning everything she could about supporting a transgender child. Maddie's wardrobe underwent a complete overhaul. Weekend shopping trips became a regular occurrence as she explored her new style. I'll never forget the joy on her face when she tried on her first dress in a store fitting room, twirling in front of the mirror with pure delight. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Dad's absence left a palpable hole in our lives. Though he called occasionally to check in, his conversations were stilted and uncomfortable. He refused to use Maddie's new name or pronouns, causing fresh pain each time he spoke to her. One evening, about a month into the school year, I overheard Mom on the phone with Dad. Their voices were raised, Mom's tone frustrated and angry. "She's your child, John! How can you turn your back on her like this?" There was a pause as Dad responded, his words indistinct, but his tone clearly defensive. "No, you listen to me," Mom continued, her voice shaking with emotion. "Maddie is happier than she's been in years. She's finally becoming her true self. If you can't see that, if you can't love and support her unconditionally, then maybe it's better if you stay away." The sound of the phone being slammed down echoed through the house. I retreated to my room, my heart heavy. As much as Dad's attitude angered me, I knew his rejection was tearing Maddie apart. Later that night, unable to sleep, I wandered downstairs for a glass of water. I was surprised to find the kitchen light on, Maddie sitting at the table with a mug of tea in front of her. "Hey," I said softly, sliding into the chair across from her. "Couldn't sleep?" She shook her head, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "I heard Mom on the phone with Dad." I winced. Yeah, I heard some of that too." Maddie was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea as if it held the answers to all of life's problems. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you think he'll ever accept me?" The vulnerability in her voice broke my heart. I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "I don't know, Maddie. I hope so. But even if he doesn't, it doesn't change who you are or how much Mom and I love you." She nodded, blinking back tears. I miss him, you know? Even when he was here, I felt like I was always hiding a part of myself from him. And now that I'm finally being true to who I am, he's gone. I squeezed her hand gently. "I know, it's not fair, but you're so strong, Maddie. Look at everything you've overcome already. Whatever happens with Dad, you'll get through it. And you won't be alone." A small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "Thanks, Arwen. I don't know what I'd do without you and Mom." We sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping tea and finding comfort in each other's presence. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky outside, Maddie yawned and stood up. "I should try to get some sleep," she said, stretching. "Thanks for listening." I stood too, pulling her into a hug. "Anytime, sis. That's what I'm here for." As I watched her head back upstairs, I made a silent vow to myself. No matter what challenges lay ahead, I would always be there for Maddie. She was my sister, and nothing, not narrow-minded classmates, not unsupportive relatives, not even our own father, would change that. The weeks turned into months, and life settled into a new rhythm. Maddie continued to flourish, growing more confident in her identity with each passing day. Her natural compassion and quick wit, traits that had always been there but often hidden behind insecurity, began to shine through more and more. At school, she joined the drama club, discovering a passion for performance that seemed to liberate something within her. Watching her on stage, fully embodying her characters, I often found myself moved to tears by the joy and freedom she exuded. As autumn gave way to winter, the holiday season approached, bringing with it a mix of excitement and apprehension. This would be our first Christmas without Dad, and the thought cast a shadow over what should have been a joyous time. One evening in early December, as we sat around the dinner table, Mom broached the subject we'd all been avoiding. "Girls," she began, setting down her fork, "I think we need to talk about Christmas plans." Maddie and I exchanged glances, both of us tensing slightly. Mom took a deep breath before continuing. "I spoke with your father yesterday. He wants to come for Christmas dinner." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Maddie, trying to gauge her reaction. Her face was a mask of conflicting emotions: hope, fear, anger, longing. "What did you tell him?" Maddie asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Mom reached across the table, taking Maddie's hand in hers. "I told him he was welcome, but only if he could respect you for who you are. That means using your name and pronouns and not making any negative comments about your identity." Maddie nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on her plate. "And what did he say?" "He said he'd think about it," Mom replied softly. "I know it's not the answer we were hoping for, but it's a start. The ball is in his court now." I felt a surge of anger at Dad's reluctance, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about me or my feelings towards him. It was about what Maddie needed. "What do you want to do, Maddie?" I asked gently. "If Dad does come, are you okay with that?" She was quiet for a long moment, absently pushing food around her plate. When she finally looked up, there was a determined set to her jaw. "Yes," she said firmly. "I want him to come. I want him to see me, the real me, Maybe if he sees how happy I am, he'll understand." Mom smiled, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "That's very brave of you, sweetheart. We'll make sure you have all the support you need, no matter what happens." I nodded in agreement. "Yeah, and if he says one wrong thing, I'll kick him out myself." That got a small laugh out of Maddie, breaking the tension in the room. As we finished our dinner, talk turned to more pleasant aspects of the holidays, decorating the tree, baking cookies, picking out gifts. But I could see the worry lingering in Maddie's eyes, and I knew the upcoming reunion with Dad weighed heavily on her mind. The days leading up to Christmas were a blur of activity. We threw ourselves into holiday preparations with perhaps more enthusiasm than usual, as if we could ward off our anxiety with twinkling lights and gingerbread houses. Maddie spent hours agonizing over what to wear for Christmas dinner, wanting to look her best, but also feeling nervous about presenting too femininely in front of Dad. In the end, she settled on a tasteful green sweater dress with leggings, festive and feminine, but not overly flashy. As Christmas Day dawned, the atmosphere in our house was a strange mix of excitement and tension. We opened presents in the morning, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy and cheer. Maddie's face lit up when she unwrapped a beautiful silver locket from Mom, a traditionally feminine piece of jewelry that seemed to symbolize her acceptance of Maddie's identity. But as the afternoon wore on and the time for dinner approached, the nervous energy became palpable. Mom busied herself in the kitchen, cooking up a storm as if she could solve all our problems with the perfect roast turkey. I helped Maddie with her hair and makeup, both of us making forced small talk to distract from our nerves. At precisely 5 p.m., the doorbell rang. The sound seemed to echo through the house, causing us all to freeze in place. Mom wiped her hands on her apron, took a deep breath, and went to answer the door. I stood next to Maddie in the living room, close enough that our shoulders touched. I could feel her trembling slightly and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Remember," I whispered, "no matter what happens, you are valid and loved. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." She nodded, squaring her shoulders as we heard Dad's voice in the entryway, followed by Mom's quieter tones. Then, footsteps approaching. Dad appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in a button-up shirt and slacks. His eyes landed on Maddie, and for a moment, he just stared, his expression unreadable. Maddie lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Merry Christmas." Dad swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Merry Christmas," he replied gruffly. He paused, seeming to struggle with himself for a moment before adding, "You look, nice." It wasn't much, but it was something. I saw Maddie's shoulders relax slightly, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Thank you," she said softly. Mom appeared behind Dad, her face a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Dinner's ready," she announced. "Shall we?" We made our way to the dining room, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. As we took our seats, I noticed Dad's eyes darting to Maddie repeatedly, taking in her appearance, her mannerisms. The meal began in awkward silence, broken only by the clinking of cutlery and murmured requests to pass dishes. I racked my brain for a safe topic of conversation, anything to break the unbearable tension. Finally, it was Maddie who spoke up. "So, Dad," she began, her voice only slightly shaky, "how's work been?" Dad seemed startled to be addressed directly. "Oh, it's been fine. Busy, end of the year and all that." Maddie nodded, pushing forward bravely. "I've been pretty busy, too. I joined the drama club at school. We just finished our winter production." "Drama club?" Dad repeated, sounding surprised. "You never showed interest in that before?" "I guess I never felt confident enough before," Maddie replied, a hint of challenge in her voice. "But now..." Well, Dad's eyebrows furrowed slightly at Maddie's words, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. Now what? He asked, his tone a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Maddie took a deep breath, her fingers fidgeting with her napkin under the table. Now I feel like I can be myself, she said softly but firmly. Being on stage, becoming different characters, it's liberating. It's helped me understand myself better. Mom reached over, placing her hand gently on Maddie's arm in a show of support. She was wonderful in the play, John. You should have seen her. Dad's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'm sure she was, he said, the pronoun seeming to stick in his throat. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table again. I desperately wanted to say something, to defend Maddie or challenge Dad's obvious discomfort, but I held my tongue. This was Maddie's moment, her chance to connect with Dad on her own terms. After a few moments, Dad cleared his throat. So, how are your grades? Keeping up with your studies? Maddie nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. Actually, they've improved. I made the honor roll this semester. Dad's eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise. Really? That's great. It is, Mom chimed in, her voice warm with pride. Maddie's been working so hard, and she's happier than I've seen her in years. Dad's eyes flicked between Mom and Maddie, a conflicted expression on his face. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, seemingly at a loss for words. Maddie took advantage of the moment to press on. I've been thinking about college, too, she said. I'm considering majoring in psychology or social work. I want to help other kids who might be struggling with their identity. I watched Dad carefully, seeing a myriad of emotions flash across his face. Surprise, confusion, and something that looked almost like pride before it was quickly suppressed. That's quite a goal, he said slowly. It won't be easy. Maddie's chin lifted slightly, a determined glint in her eye. I know, but I've already faced so many challenges. I'm stronger than I ever knew I could be. The raw honesty in her voice seemed to catch Dad off guard. He stared at her for a long moment, really looking at her, perhaps for the first time since he'd arrived. You do seem different, he said quietly, more confident. Maddie nodded. I am. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm truly myself. I know this is hard for you to understand, Dad, but this is who I am, who I've always been, deep down. Dad's grip on his fork tightened, his knuckles turning white. I tensed, ready to intervene if needed, but he simply took a deep breath and nodded stiffly. I'm trying to understand, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. It's not easy for me, but I can see that you're happier. Tears welled up in Maddie's eyes, but she blinked them back, offering Dad a watery smile. Thank you, she whispered. That means a lot to me. The tension in the room eased slightly, like a tightly wound spring beginning to uncoil. We weren't magically fixed, far from it, but it felt like a tiny step in the right direction. As we continued eating, the conversation gradually became less stilted. Dad asked hesitant questions about Maddie's life at school, her friends, her plans for the future. Though he still struggled with her name and pronouns, stumbling over them or avoiding them altogether, he was making an effort. When dessert was served, Mom's famous apple pie, Dad actually cracked a small smile as he took his first bite. Still the best pie in the state, he said, nodding appreciatively at Mom. Maddie helped make it, Mom replied, a hint of challenge in her voice. Dad paused, fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at Maddie, then back at the pie. Well, he said finally, I guess you inherited your mother's baking skills. It wasn't much, but the casual acknowledgement of Maddie as his daughter, even in such a small way, felt monumental. Maddie's face lit up with a smile brighter than any Christmas light. As the evening drew to a close, Dad stood awkwardly by the door, shrugging on his coat. He turned to face us, his expression uncertain. Thank you for having me, he said stiffly. It was good to see you all. Mom nodded, her smile tight but genuine. You're always welcome here, John. I hope you know that. Dad's eyes settled on Maddie. For a long moment, he just looked at her, as if trying to reconcile the child he remembered with the young woman standing before him. Finally, he cleared his throat. Maddie, he corrected himself, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. I'm glad you're doing well. Maybe we could talk more sometime. Maddie's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with tears. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. In a move that surprised us all, Dad stepped forward and pulled Maddie into a brief, awkward hug. It lasted only a moment before he stepped back, looking flustered. Merry Christmas, he mumbled, then turned and hurried out the door. As soon as the door closed behind him, Maddie burst into tears. Mom and I were at her side in an instant, enveloping her in a group hug. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.